although you'll be looking a little bit more glazed. And that's not very marketable, unfortunately. That's not what people want to see. They want to see you shredded, hard, dry, dense, and veiny, all the time. It takes its toll. And besides the blood work that I have, the average blood work from the results that I've received over the last couple of years, how many of these Instagram models or social media influencers have Vigorous Steve here with the average blood work of reasonably to highly successful Instagram models. Now, this is not about any Instagram model in particular. This is just a combination of the blood work that I received over the last couple of years from Instagram models with at least 50,000 followers when they were in phenomenal shape. Again, that's required when you're an Instagram model because you won't get any followers or not as much when you're not in phenomenal shape. So these guys are usually shredded year round. And when they're not shredded, their blood work is going to look better because they're off most of the PEDs or they're just taking a break and they got plenty of pictures buffered to keep the subscriber and follower gain train going. So all the blood work that I received from these 17 Instagram models over the last couple of years, whether that was just for general review or a quick question or a consultation to get their blood work back into healthy parameters. 17 different guys, 23 blood works. I put it all together and got the average. So you guys have a little bit of an understanding what goes on behind the scenes because, let's be honest, most of the Instagram models are not putting their blood work online for review so you guys can see what comes along with this fantastic body. Unfortunately, some of them are even saying that they're natural, but hey, at one point or another, they contact yours truly when they get into a particular situation where health conditions need to be resolved. So again, it's not about particular Instagram models. It's just a combination. 23 different blood works. Not all the blood works were complete. So that means for some blood work markers, there's only 7 data points. And others, there's 23 or maybe 17 or 12 or whatever. This is just the average to get an indication of what it's going to take if you want to be famous on Instagram. Let's start with the urinalysis. You see that your average Instagram model urinalysis, and I can't believe that we're talking about this. I'm sure Connor Murphy is getting a little bit excited already. But hey, we're doing this for informational and educational purposes, and the urinalysis is part of that. So, the average urinalysis is yellow. Appearance is clear, not cloudy, so that's a good sign. There's no glucose, no protein, no blood, no nitrites, no ketones, no urobilinogen and bilirubin or leukocytes in the urinalysis. But I had 2 subjects with ketones in their urine, probably indicating that they were in ketosis or in severe ketosis upon waking. And again, you never know if some pharmacology is involved because not all these Instagram models were completely transparent about what they were taking. Now, the specific gravity falls right in the middle. I didn't tell most of these Instagram models to drink about 1 liter or 1.5 liters of water before they do their blood work and urinalysis, which is what I tell most of my clients. Make sure you go in hydrated to rule out, specific elevated hematocrit, for example, or elevated creatinine on the blood work results. So you can see that on the specific gravity. I know I mentioned it many times before, but I want to make this video as complete as possible. Now, I saw on some Instagram models, maybe 2 or 3 times on the guys that I included in this average urinalysis result, is that their specific gravity was to the top or over the reference range. So that's 1.03, 1.036, if I remember correctly. And it indicates dehydration. So you want to have your specific gravity on the low side by drinking a decent amount of water before you go in for blood work and do the urinalysis. But from what I understand, a lot of these Instagram models, they don't drink any water until they get their footage or pictures in the morning. So I completely understand why they're doing it. Because again, you need to look absolutely phenomenal to get a decent amount of followers on Instagram and keep that up, the tempo up on a day-to-day basis, because that's, you have to post every day. Otherwise, the algorithm is not going to pick you up, unfortunately. And if you skip a day, the world explodes and you get depressed. But hey, this is social media and what you have to do for it. So a lot of these guys, they don't drink enough water when they go into the gym and take their pictures or workout videos or pictures in the kitchen or whatever product they need to promote. So a lot of the cases, these guys are dehydrated for certain periods of the day. And I'm not sure if diuretics are involved. Again, I don't see any protein or blood in the urinalysis. So I'm assuming that everybody had healthy kidney function. Because, of course, when you see protein and blood in the urine, there's something going on with your kidneys. And it's probably better to take a break and do an ultrasound to see what's really going on. So most of this average urinalysis is pretty okay. Let's move on to the complete blood count. Where is it? No, here it is. Not too bad. A couple pretty big discrepancies between the different Instagram models. Some guys have very high hematocrit. Some guys have pretty low hematocrit, probably because of the drug selection. So the average hematocrit is 51.6%. Hemoglobin towards the top of the reference range, 17.4 grams per deciliter. White blood cell count, 5,216. Within the reference range, it's to be expected to be at the bottom of the reference range. We're using anabolic androgenic steroids or SARMs, because white blood cells have androgen receptors also. So typical blood work, you see that the white blood cells are a little bit lower. And when you see them very, very high or extremely low, there's probably an indication of an infection going on. Red blood cell count, decent, in range. Mean corpulus volume in range. Mean corpulus hemoglobin in range. Mean corpulus hemoglobin concentration in range. But the red cell distribution width, the difference between the sizes of the red blood cells is skewed, 14.6%. So there's a higher discrepancy between the size of the red blood cells comparing the average size to the larger size. And it usually indicates an iron deficiency. Unfortunately, I didn't really have enough data to pull from to see if there was an iron deficiency or a folate or vitamin B12 deficiency. Usually when there's severe deficiency, you see that the MCV, MCH, MCHC, and RDW is all skewed. But usually when the RDW is a little bit elevated, it indicates an iron deficiency, which could be expected because, most of these guys, they don't really eat beef because they're afraid that it will thicken the skin. And of course, beef has the highest bioavailable iron form in the form of hema iron. And most of these guys were excluding iron from their diets. Now, some of them had to do blood donations because they were running Primo or Boldenone, the dry cutting compounds, right? So their hematocrit went up. Doing conventional blood donations, not power red donations, where it returns some of the plasma and the iron and the ferritin. So some of these guys, I told them, said, listen, clearly don't have enough iron in your diet. You need to either add beef to your diet or start supplementing iron ferrous bisglycinate tablets at the end of the day, because sometimes some people get constipation from iron supplements. So in some cases, that red cell distribution width came down. But you see that the average is still a little bit out of the reference range. So that's concerning. And if you're an Instagram model, please check your red cell distribution width and your serum iron and ferritin concentrations. If the average is skewed, you might be one of the unlucky fews with, elevated red cell distribution width. Platelets are pretty normal. And you see that most of the white blood cell differential is normal, but the eosinophils are a little bit elevated. And that's usually an indication of injections, right? There's not, like when your white blood cells are really skewed in cases of infection, then your neutrophils or lymphocytes are all over the place. Could be very, very high, could be very, very low. It depends on which infection and which stage of infection you're in. That is going to determine how your white blood cell differential is going to be skewed. But I see it very common with guys that inject frequently, that their eosinophils are slightly elevated. So that's 6%, 7% of the overall white blood cell differential. And in most of these guys' blood work, their eosinophils were either 5, 6, 7, and sometimes even 8. So again, could have to do with, drug selection, sterility selection. Some of these guys are sponsored to get their PEDs for free. And free PEDs doesn't mean it's quality PEDs. Unfortunately, I wish that was the case, but usually free PEDs means, less than ideal quality. So, guys, please keep that in mind. Eosinophils is not something that you want to have elevated chronically. Blood sugar is pretty normal, 90 milligrams per deciliter. Bun is a little bit on the high side, 28.1 milligrams per deciliter. Could be because of dehydration. Again, not drinking enough water before going in for blood work, or simply from a high protein diet. Again, a lot of these guys need to be in shape. A lot of them follow a ketogenic diet or a low carb diet or a protein and vegetables at certain points to really look, nice and dry and lean and hard and dense. That's not very sustainable. But again, usually when I get these blood work results, there's something going on. So we can expect that there's a couple things off. So bun is 28.1 milligrams per deciliter. One guy had 32 milligrams per deciliter, and some of the guys had, normal bun, BUN, blood urea nitrogen. Some of them had normal, and it, brings it to the average of slightly elevated blood urea nitrogen. Creatine is a little bit elevated, 1.26 milligrams per deciliter. Not too bad, slightly over the reference range. I would say it's a normal creatinine reading, and not, sounding a little bit derogatory, but again, when you're training early in the morning and you're slightly dehydrated and you're doing all these funky exercises for Instagram, to look cool and not really show the exercise, but show your muscle definition, the training intensity is not really there. You can see that from the creatine phosphate kinase total. It's only 2,000 units per liter. I'm going to have to say that's probably from clenbuterol than from the training intensity and slightly dehydration, because again, the blood urea nitrogen, the creatinine, and the creatine phosphate kinase are, pretty susceptible to dehydration. So if you don't drink enough, those blood work markers are going to be elevated. And if you, take some clenbuterol or stimulants to keep you going in this tremendous caloric deficit, your CPK is going to be disproportionately higher compared to a guy that's training insane without any stimulants. Like a lot of my bodybuilder clients have 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 creatine phosphate kinase, but their creatinine is totally normal. So it's just an indication of training or, again, clenbuterol or stimulant use. Uric acid is normal. C-reactive protein, 3.71 milligrams per liter. And that's, some guys were doing a high sensitivity test and some guys were doing a conventional C-reactive protein test. And I have honestly no idea what the exact difference is when you would have to calculate, C-reactive protein to high sensitivity. I've seen blood work results where C-reactive protein on the conventional test was like 5 milligrams per liter. And then they go in for a high sensitivity test a day later and it's 15. In other cases, it's 7, right? So it's a little bit hard to pinpoint, how much a conventional test would translate into a high sensitivity test. Of course, there's a discrepancy there. A high sensitivity test is always going to be more accurate. And in basically all the cases that I've seen, the numbers are going to be higher. So I just mixed them together to get the average. The average is 3.71 milligrams per liter. Again, because, the PED selection is not all pharmaceutical grade. Because the primobolan, the masteron, the boldenones, sometimes the trembolone sandwich. Yeah, that's all underground labs or besides primobolan, which is available as a pharmaceutical. Not everybody's running pharmaceutical grade. Most of them are running underground labs, and, elevated C-reactive protein concentrations is to be expected when ethyl oleate, propylene glycol, or another synthetic carrier oil is being used. Yeah. One guy had a 15, 17 milligrams per liter on his high sensitivity C-reactive protein test. So I told him to toss all his free PEDs in the trash. I'm not sure if he did. Again, it was up to him. Now, most of that is pretty acceptable, guys, to be honest. I've seen way worse on blood works, and sometimes the bodybuilders have, pre-skewed levels as well from training intensity or, again, pharmacology. Or, prolonged exposure to moderate dosages of pharmacology. Now, when you look at the lipid profile, it gets interesting. Cholesterol is in range at 191 milligrams per deciliter. Triglycerides are nice and low. Again, most of these guys are doing caloric restriction, frequent cardio, maybe 1 hour, 2 hours per day, year round, to stay that lean, to get that lower back and, hamstring glute tie-in, nice and chiseled. Again, cardio is required. But again, the drug selection, and most of these guys were smart enough to put some sort of citrus bergamot, fish oil, and again, the cardio in place to keep, cholesterol and lipid profile favorable. Unfortunately, drug selection will usually override that. So, Winstrol, Primobolan, Anavar, basically everything that makes you look good is, the longer you take it, the worse your lipids are going to look. And then the average HDL is 17 milligrams per deciliter, and the average LDL cholesterol is 156 milligrams per deciliter. And I've had a couple guys with an HDL of 4, 7, and LDL of 200 at the same time. So that ratio is, almost 50 to 1? It's insane, right? You want a 1 to 1 or 2 to 1 ratio. At least keep your HDL, about half of your LDL. Ideally, they're as close to 1 to 1 as you can get, but you won't look as good. Again, it's DHT compounds that skew your lipid concentrations. And as we'll see later, crushed estrogen and caloric restriction and poor food choices, excluding dietary fat, again, to stay shredded, is going to take its toll. Now, liver enzymes, most of it is pretty good. The liver function tests, most of them were pretty good. Total protein, 7.3 grams per deciliter. Albumin, 4.6. Globulin, 2.3. Albumin to globulin ratio, 1.6. Total bilirubin and direct bilirubin, nice in the middle of the reference range. Alkaline phosphate, also in the middle of the reference range. But the liver enzymes are slightly elevated. Now, could be many underlying conditions. Again, could be training intensity, could be pharmacology, could be non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, even though I've never seen an Instagram model that I sent in for an ultrasound with a hint of non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. Probably because they don't eat so much and they're very diligent with their diet and basically, suffering all the way through their continuous journey of getting an insane amount of followers and looking phenomenal online. Or at the conventions, they do get invited for conventions frequently, back when we still had conventions. The good old days. So, liver enzymes are a little bit elevated, but not alarmingly. Again, could be many underlying conditions, but considering that the gamma GT is nice and low on average, and all the other liver enzymes are in range on average. Again, on average, I can't remember if protein or albumin or globulin or bilirubin were out of range. I don't think they were out of range on any of the blood work data points that I had. So only the liver enzymes in most cases were somewhat elevated or, severely elevated. So the average is that they're, 200%, 150% out of the reference range. Again, nothing too bad. I've seen it way worse on bodybuilders slamming, tablets of Superdrol and halotestin at the end of a contest prep to look phenomenal on stage for half a day. Now again, like I mentioned before about the estradiol, when you look at the hormone panel, the average estradiol is 12.6 picograms per milliliter, which is close to the bottom of the reference range. And guess what? Even though these guys look phenomenal, most of them were complaining about libido issues. So that's a huge trade-off, right? I mean, you look like so appealing to general population. And I see the DMs sometimes, they get DMs on the daily. There's a lot of girls sliding into the DMs. But with this estrogen, there's no desire to spread the love, unfortunately. And a lot of these guys that I talk to, they have severe libido issues because, again, they crush their estrogen, caloric restriction, the pressure of social media. Of course, it messes with your brain also. So and that's not very conducive for awesome libido. So for the guys that listened to me and did follow-up blood work, which I didn't include because they no longer looked phenomenal, unfortunately, because they brought their estrogen up, they brought their food calories back up, and they ate a little bit more fat, more freely to restore their libido, get a little bit more to baseline and become a little bit more approachable. They were better off in the libido department and maybe not better off in the, looking phenomenal Instagram model department. It's a huge trade-off, guys. Now, all the guys that I consulted with, no surprise, FSH, or follicle-stimulating hormone, and luteinizing hormone, bottomed out. Some of them were undetectable. Some of them were a little bit higher than, but still, below, the bottom of the reference range. Even though some of them claim to be natural. Yeah. Viewer or follower discretion is always advised. So, all of them were enhanced. Again, no surprise there. And, the follicle-stimulating hormone, luteinizing hormone, is going to be at the bottom of the detectable range or completely undetectable. In which case, I put 0.01 because you can't take an average of 0, right? Testosterone, not as high as I expected it to be. Again, it's a little bit all over the place. Some guys had a subclinical testosterone because they were doing a primobolan or boldenone or SARM cycle. And their testosterone was basically like 50 nanograms per deciliter or 100, that's subclinical. And other guys had pretty high testosterone concentrations. But, considering that other anabolics are involved and you're doing a conventional chemiluminescence immunoassay testing method, again, I had to mix everything together. So some guys did liquid chromatography tandem mass spectrometry test, very accurate, and their testosterone was like 2,000 nanograms per deciliter. And other guys did ECLIA or CMIA. So, I just put everything together to get the average. But surprisingly, most of these guys run, testosterone to a little bit over superphysiological concentrations. And most guys, honestly, they're right at the top of the reference range. You just run TRT. Of course, your estrogen is still going to be crushed because of the additional, primobolan, boldenone, masterone, winstrol, etc. to look shredded and phenomenal online. So, and there might be a little bit of cross-contamination because, again, the testing method is not so accurate, and the primobolan, the boldenone, or whatever they're running on top of the testosterone is giving a false positive for additional testosterone. So, not as high as I expected it to be, but again, I would prefer the testosterone and estrogen a little bit higher for overall health, although you'll be looking a little bit more glazed. And that's not very marketable, unfortunately. That's not what people want to see. They want to see you shredded, hard, dry, dense, and veiny, all the time. It takes its toll. And besides the blood work that I have, the average blood work from the results that I've received over the last couple of years, how many of these Instagram models or social media influencers have tendon issues? That's a chronic reduction of estrogen and perhaps using diuretics and dehydrating for certain periods during the day. They all got tendon issues in the elbows, the knees, the lower back, and some of the old school social media guys. They had to stop training altogether and had to do surgeries on their elbows and knees. Lazar Angelov, for example, he got into a huge depression. And I'm not saying that he was crushing his estrogen, but it's a known side effect from crushing your estrogen for prolonged periods of time and combining that with DHT drugs like winstrol, masterone, which have a negative effect on collagen synthesis if you don't have the estrogen to go along with that. And in caloric restriction and perhaps doing fluffy Instagram workouts that look cool but are not so good for connective tissue health. Right? I'm not saying that Lazar Angelov was doing that, but I see a little bit of an overlap and a correlation between looking phenomenal for a couple of years, maybe even a decade, and then having to pay the price with connective tendon issues. Now, what's very interesting, of course, because the sexual binding globulin is, for all these guys, is at the bottom of the reference range. I had one guy with pretty high sexual binding globulin when he was only running testosterone, and he kept going with his dietary practices, which is, low fat, low carbs, protein and vegetables. He had pretty high sexual binding globulin, but it wasn't enough to offset. Or no, I didn't include that blood work into the average because he was not looking phenomenal. And again, it's about looking phenomenal to give you guys an indication of what the average blood work looks like. And sexual binding globulin way below the reference range because estrogen is close to the bottom of the reference range, and the DHT derivatives in Proviron, winstrol, Anavar, all of them are known to lower sexual binding globulin to a certain extent, especially Proviron. That's if you want to crush your sexual binding globulin to abysmal concentrations, and impair your sex drive. Controversial. I'm sure I get some dislikes for it. But prolonged proviron use is definitely the way to go. Yeah, caloric restriction results in elevated TSH. Because most of these guys were not on growth hormone. Most of these guys were not supplementing with T4. Again, growth hormone leads to water retention, and that's not very desired when you're an Instagram model that has to look shredded 24/7. Or, some of the more knowledgeable guys would do one growth hormone administration somewhere at the end of the day, allowing for sufficient time for that water to dissipate before the next photo shoot. So, you see that T4 concentrations, T3 concentrations are all a little bit on the low side. TSH is a little bit elevated. Some guys had tremendously elevated TSH. Some guys had normal TSH, bringing the range back into normal. But again, I see it a lot with the guys that are in chronic caloric restriction. TSH is very, very high, while their total T4 and free T4 are low, and their T3 is also low. Because again, they're not on top of their iodine, selenium intake, or prolonged caloric restriction, or they're not supplementing with T4 to keep their metabolism going and their thyroid stimulating hormone somewhat suppressed, or at least within the reference range, because now there's enough additional T4 to promote healthy thyroid conversion. So that's pretty much the average blood work. I wish I had more data points for ferritin, serum iron, and all the other markers that I like everybody to test. But at least this was enough to draw a pretty average conclusion of what, an Instagram model's blood work looks like. Again, sometimes it's all over the place. A lot of the guys that I ended up working with, they might come to me with not so good blood work, and then I'm able to improve that without any deleterious effects to their looks. Again, you always have to find a balance. So maybe they look a little bit more watery and a little bit more fluffy. Still, what most people would say, better than 99% of the population. And honestly, their audience didn't even notice. You don't see any comments like, dude, why do you look softer and more watery now? Right? Those comments are not there. So the audience is still appreciative of the physique that they promote and market on Instagram. But their health is certainly way better. And some guys don't listen. They don't come back to me, so I don't know what the follow-up blood work is, but I just go by what I see on Instagram. There's no change in physique. And sometimes they look even more, more shredded or more dry or more fatigued and more caloric restrictive, right? That takes its toll as well. Or you hear a rumor like, oh, this guy was impossible because he's moody all the time. Again, you guys only see, one aspect of social media. And I just want to give you guys a fair warning that whatever you see is just one part of it. There's blood work attached, and there's maybe some libido changes, some personality changes, some mood changes. That comes along with, looking phenomenal online 24/7. And I really hope that helps, guys. I'm not trying to deter you from being an Instagram model. I just want to give you guys a little bit of an insight of what could potentially occur if you decide to go that route. Again, I've seen all of the blood work, and I've talked with a decent amount of these guys. And is it worth it? Well, considering the amount of money that these guys are making, I would say yes. And of course, it's very good for brand recognition. Just keep in mind that not everybody has the genetics and the shape and the structure and the work ethic to really get to that point of millions of Instagram followers. But if you do have that shape and genetic predisposition to be lean, so you don't have to use the drugs and be in tremendous caloric restrictive state all the time, and you're willing to put in the work because you'll still have to do cardio to stay lean, it might be worth it, honestly. Just make sure that your connective tissue stays healthy, because that's the most long-term negative effects that I've been seeing on the Instagram models that look phenomenal for almost a decade. And it pretty much wraps it up. Thank you so much for watching. A Vigorous crew. You guys know what to do. Front double bicep for you guys. You guys are awesome. I know it doesn't look like an Instagram model. Maybe in the future. Never say never, because some of the blood work that I've seen from the Instagram models was looking better than my blood work when I was my absolute freakiest, hardest, driest, and nastiest. Yeah, I won't lie. My blood work was worse in most cases. So maybe it might be better for me in the future to go the Instagram model route. I'll have to practice my vacuums a little bit and maybe wear one of those waist trainers, 24/7, bring my waist in a little bit more. Let's see. Never say never, right? If you're looking for the most comprehensive guides to bodybuilding pharmacology, you can find the ebooks on my website, vigoroussteve.com/shop. If you're looking for personalized advice, you can find the rates to my services in the services section. Contact me directly if you're interested on the contact form or on Instagram at VigorousSteve. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.